Welcome to this quick video introduction to the virtual TTRPG system, Celestus. This is not going to be an exhaustive rundown of how Foundry works, and is mostly meant as a way to show the features of this system and record any knowledge needed to play in a game of Celestus. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the playtest Discord server. And as a disclaimer, anything in this video is subject to change, as the system is still in development, though most things I talk about here likely won't fundamentally change. Alright, let's get into this. The first thing I'm going to do is obviously log in with this account that I've created for this demonstration. And you see we're logging in for the first time. This is just some generic Foundry things. It's going to ask us to select a player character. This is a Foundry thing, but it's going to be important because the system is actually going to care about this. Now that we're logged in, we can jump into the character sheet. I'm just going to go under the actors section, select our character, and we have our character sheet up here. I'm going to start out by quickly going through all these sections of the character sheet, and then I'll go back and we can talk about each section more in depth. Starting off in the top left, we have this kind of character overview and attributes and all this sort of miscellaneous stuff. This is all the stuff that doesn't have a clear individual category. So up here we have our character portrait. We're just going to leave that like that for now. We can't set it because of the way this world is configured. Normal users don't have permission to access the file system, which means they can't set files. There's this little gear icon that we can use to set a token pointer tint. You'll see on the map here, these little things. It's the color of those. And then we can turn off or on this little portrait frame on our character sheet. We have our character name. We have our character creature type. This is going to stay as humanoid. We have our character level. We have our exhaustion level. We have our movement. We have our initiative. And then we have these three buttons. One of them is a fake button, and it's just displays whether or not we're in combat. And then we have a button to refresh resources and a button to rest. Okay. Then we have the resources section that is going to store action points, focus points, hit points, physical armor, magical armor, all that. There's going to be a little weapon damage breakdown. Right now it's kind of empty because we don't have a weapon. We have our attributes right here, broken down as that. And we have our resistances, which is also empty because our character has no resistances. We have some miscellaneous bonuses, and we have our languages. Up here is going to be all of our equipped gear, which is empty because we have no gear. We have our abilities tab. The abilities is going to cover our combat and civil abilities. We have our skills, which is empty because we have no skills. Same with items, broken down into armor, weapons, and offhands. We have features. We have our biography, which, once again, no mechanical meanings. It's just where you can put is my character's backstory. We can put a backstory or something in here, or maybe notes or whatever you want to do. And then we have the active effects. This is kind of a Foundry thing, but also a system thing. If your character has any statuses, they'll show up here, and any other mechanical temporary effects will show up there as well. Now that we've quickly gone through that, I'm going to go through all these sections again, but talk about the rules, talk about a little more in depth. You can feel free to skip ahead or rewatch individual parts of this section. Skipping through the name, creature type, relatively self-explanatory. It's pretty much always going to be humanoid for a player character. Our character level, right now this is just a literal text field. You can just set your character's level. It's going to cap you out at a certain point. If I try to set this to 22, it's going to set it to 20. If I try to set it to 0, it's going to set it to 1. The way that level is represented in this game, it's going to affect a few things, but mainly it's going to affect our resources, like our hit points and armor values are going to scale off of it, and our damage for our weapons and our skills and stuff will also scale off of it. Exhaustion is going to mostly be handled automatically. When you rest, it's going to take away all your exhaustion, and any time that it would be applied naturally, it'll be applied, well, naturally. The main reason why you'll get levels of exhaustion is that if your HP drops below 0 and then goes back above, you'll gain a level of exhaustion. Movement, every character has a base movement of 20, but some other things may modify that, like a combat skill we'll talk about later. And then we have our initiative. Mainly in combat is the main time initiative is going to matter, but it is a d20 roll that gets a bonus from your wits. Right now our wits is 10, so our initiative is 10. We went over these two buttons. They're just, one of them refreshes our resources, one of them lets us rest. We can talk about that later if it comes up. Resources. So, right up here on top, we have these little green circles, which might not mean a lot to you, but these are action points. So by default, you start with 4 every round in combat or in a scene or some sort of time-sensitive manner, and you can have a maximum of 6 at a time, and you'll get 4 more every turn. So if you start with 4 and you spend 2, then the next turn you'll go up to 6, but you can't go above 6. Not pictured on this character sheet are focus points, which will be displayed as little yellow triangles. Those only come into play at higher levels, so they don't really show up for this level 1 character. Moving on to these 3 bars here, we have our hit points and we have our armor. So these are going to be the main resources that determine whether or not your character dies. Hit points is pretty self-explanatory, I suppose, right? It's your character's health, it's how healthy they are. You take damage, it reduces hit points. If you drop to 0 hit points or below, your character falls unconscious and cannot act on their turn, but suffers no other effects in the immediate term. If your character is at 0 or below 0, as we'll talk about, your character can still take damage. So if you take 50 damage and you're at 30 HP, you'll go to negative 20 HP. If you go to an amount of HP that's equal to the negative of your max HP, you die. If you are healed from negative HP to positive HP, you get a level of exhaustion. That's the main way that'll happen, and I can demonstrate that here, right? Negative 1 HP, up to 1 HP, nope, to 10 HP, sure. We get a level of exhaustion. What does exhaustion do? It reduces all of our attribute totals by 1. You see here, there's a -1 here now because we're getting a bonus -1. All these are 1 less than that number there. We can talk about attributes when we get to attributes. Physical armor and magic armor, these are both types of armor. They both function as sort of buffers for your hit points, where if you have any armor, damage will be dealt to that first. Physical armor blocks physical damage, magical armor blocks all of the other damage, and then piercing damage ignores both, because it is piercing through your armor. This number right here is the flat amount we have. This is like our base, this is just our physical armor value. Then we have this little +0. You can have temporary armor, which may come from skills or stuff, but you can only have one source of temporary armor at a time. That will add, and then this 0 here is out of our total. So our max armor is 0 and 0 because we have no armor on. Once we put on armor, those values will change. We have our weapon damage breakdown. This is a little reference for telling you about how much weapon damage your character will do. We can show that once we have a weapon equipped. We have our attributes, which this is what represents how good your character is naturally at things. They're kind of basic things about your character like strength, which is this first one, dexterity, intellect, constitution, mind, and wits. Strength represents how strong your character is, muscles, all that. Dexterity is kind of your character's ability to finesse things, their ability to pickpocket and stuff like that. Sleight of hand would be a dexterity thing. Mechanically also, these will buff ability checks if you make those. We can talk about those later. With strength, these are going to provide a plus, each level is going to provide plus 5% damage to strength weapons. Dexterity is going, and strength skills, notably. Dexterity is going to provide a plus 5% bonus to each. Dexterity weapon or skill, like a dagger or a bowstaff. Intellect will do the same for things that scale off intellect, like wands, scepters, and most magical skills like Fireball is an intellect skill. Constitution increases your maximum hit points. So we see here, this actually increases by 7% per point, and we see our max HP going up ever so slowly. We have our Mind stat, which determines how many skills you can memorize, which will mean something once we're talking about skills. And Wits represents how aware you are of your surroundings and kind of your perception as well, your ability to notice details. And it also does two things. One thing we see up here, it changes our initiative. Your initiative bonus is just equal to your Wits and any other things that give you an initiative bonus. But also, each point you put into Wits gives you 1% crit chance, with you having a bonus 5% crit chance. So if we have 11 Wits, 6% crit chance. And we see that here in our crit chance. Resistances are fairly self-explanatory. If you have 10% fire resist, you take 10% less fire damage. Bonuses, right here we have our crit chance, which is how likely you are to land a critical hit when you make an attack roll. You have crit damage, which is the multiplier for your critical hit damage. Like if you land a critical hit, it's just a flat 160% multiplier. Accuracy is how likely you are to hit a target. This can be influenced by your target, can have evasion, which we see below, but this is the natural chance. So right now, a level 1 character has a 95% chance to hit. Some things can influence that. You can have a higher accuracy. If you have above 100% accuracy, you just can't miss. Evasion makes it so that if someone attacks you, it lowers the percentage for them to hit by that much. So if I have 5% evasion and they have 95% accuracy, then there's a 90% chance to hit you. Damage increase is a flat damage increase. This will come from effects and skills. Lifesteal is a flat percentage of the damage that you deal that you restore as hit points. Languages are the languages that your character can speak and understand. And these can be modified with this little menu here. You just check whichever ones your character is proficient in. That is that section. That is this kind of like generic character info section. Now we're going to move on to abilities. Abilities represent what your character is trained in. These are things they may have learned from their background or things that they have learned while they're adventuring. A lot of it is going to be things that they've honed while adventuring. As you can see, we start off with 1 civil ability and 2 combat abilities. What is an ability point? There are these little numbers here, right? And you can spend an ability point to get a bonus to an ability. So each of these abilities, each will do something. Civil abilities don't impact combat in any way, and they don't provide any numerical advantage other than a +5 bonus to any ability check made with them. And these are going to be checks you usually are making out of combat. For example, Scoundrel says here it's for hiding, lockpicking, and other sleight of hand. So let's say that your character is trying to steal something. Your game master would then ask you to make a Scoundrel check, likely with dexterity. As you can see here, it asks us what attribute we want to use, or we can use no attribute. But if we do that, it's going to roll a d100, and it's going to add a bonus from our dexterity because we don't have any Scoundrel points. But if we put 1 point in Scoundrel, now it's going to roll with a +6 bonus. Each of these, if you hover over them, will tell you what they do and what they're meant for. And all more information about all of these abilities, including the combat abilities, is available in the playtest Discord. Combat abilities are providing much more numerical advantages, which you can see by hovering over them. They're split up into 2 categories here. There's fighting styles and skill schools. Fighting styles are abilities that apply to weapons or miscellaneous combat things, and don't actually apply to any skills naturally, unless the skill is a weapon skill. More on that later. We have, for example, dueling here is if you're using a single-handed weapon, you get 5% weapon damage, 5% accuracy. But we'll notice that if I put a point here, I don't get a point in accuracy until I equip a one-handed weapon. And then there's skill schools, which are different trainings for skills, which are all sorts of things. It's from healing allies to damaging things to turning invisible, right? It's a wide berth of things you can accomplish with them. And these also will say what each of the skill schools provides mechanically. A lot of them just provide 5% damage. Some of them provide 5% to damage and other things, like Tidecaller does healing and magic armor as well. Some of them, Deathbringer, gives you healing from damage, and etc., etc. Each of these abilities is broken down into these 4 columns. The first is this input field. This is your base score in that, which you can manually edit to spend your ability points, like so, right? We can put 1 in each of these. Now we have no points left to spend, and it'll give us a bonus. So this +0 here is the bonus from gear and effects, and this =0 is the total, right? So if we put 1 here, it's 1 + 0 = 1, and then the parentheses on the right is the total percentage bonus that you're getting from it. Now we can move on to skills. Skills, okay, well, the skills page here is empty because we don't have any skills. Skills are what you do everything with. You want to attack, that's a skill. You want to fly somewhere, that's a skill. You want to turn invisible, that's a skill. You want to heal someone, that's a skill. I think you get the point. In order to use a skill, it has to be memorized, as well as you have to spend any resources it consumes. So I'm going to go ahead and look at a skill. I'm going to just pull up a pretty iconic type of spell, which is Fireball. So let's look at this. So Fireball is a magic skill, which there's a few types of skills. I'm going to put this on the character sheet so that we can edit it, but then remove it later. So it's a magic skill we see here. Magic skills are generally magical in nature, and they don't require a weapon is the main thing about them. We see here we have a description that says what it does. We have these details, these prerequisites, this damage, all this info, and this is where a lot of the info you're going to need about a skill will come. We see here it's a novice flame speaker skill, which if we pull up this little handy thing, parts of a skill here, we can go through each individual step. So the type of skill here, we've gone over, it's a magic skill. We have the school, it's a flame speaker skill, and we have the tier, novice, which is the second tier, which requires level 4. It has an action points cost, which we can see here. It costs 2 action points. It has no focus points cost. It has components we see down here, verbal and somatic, which means that you have to be able to speak and have to be able to use your hands in order to use it, which many magic skills do, not all but many. There is the cooldown, which is up here above the action points. These two are not congruous, which is maybe should be changed. It's 4 rounds, so you can only use it once every 4 rounds in combat. We have a range of 90 feet, which means that the point you target here, it says 50-foot radius of that point, the point you can see within range, that's within 90 feet. We see it targets a 15-foot sphere, which is a 15-foot radius sphere, and it has no attack. It's not a weapon skill, so there's no special weapon things. The prerequisites are things that we need to meet as a character in order to learn it and use it. So we need 2 points in Flame Speaker in order to use this Fireball skill. And then we have the damage here, which here it says just 2 to 12 or 7 damage, which isn't particularly helpful. So how does skill damage work? Right here, if we look into it, and if we look at the description, it says takes 100% fire damage, which, what is 100% of what? So damage in this system is drawn from a formula that's taken from a table that is based on your level. So as you level up, all of your skills across the board will increase in damage, but then you can increase that damage further by having points in attributes, right? Our attributes provide 5% damage, so this is getting a 5% damage buff from 1 point in intellect, if we have that. And then also, if we have points in Flame Speaker, it's going to increase this damage further. We can walk through all of these parts of this skill here on the sheet, right? Lifesteal, some skills will have some inherent lifesteal to them that'll stack on top of your normal lifesteal. Right here is something that is not in this document, but it is in the Discord, which is channeling. So some skills will channel for some amount of turns. Like if we look up Gore Storm, which says it channels for 2 turns. And this is a much higher tier skill. But basically what that means is that each turn you're going to recast the skill at the start of your turn, and you recast it without expending any resources. So this costs 4 action points and 3 focus points, which is a lot, right? That's a lot of resources. But for the next 2 turns, you get to cast it again for free, so long as you're not incapacitated, which means you're really getting to cast 3 skills for 4 action points and 3 focus points, and then it sounds a little less bad. We have the targets. It targets a sphere, 15 feet. It doesn't have an attack, but if it did, we could check that. Its range right here. It has a lingering AoE, which it talks about very briefly. It leaves a fiery surface. We can talk more about surfaces later, but right now all we need to know is that it leaves fire on the floor for 2 turns. Right here we see it does 100% fire damage, and it sets burning, which is resisted by magic armor, which is something I forgot to mention about armor. Armor blocks statuses, which we'll go over later. Statuses do bad things to your character usually, so it's nice to have armor. With skills broken down, we can talk about this little memorized thing. You have a number of skills you can memorize that it says right here. We can memorize 3. We can increase this by increasing our mind. We can learn new skills as we level up. It'll tell you how many you should have known here. Right, it says we know 1 out of 4. We should know 4 at level 1. This information is in the Discord under character creation and under skills. That mostly covers that for now. On to items. So right now, in the current version of the game, there are only 3 types of items: armor, weapons, and offhands. Each of these does different things, although offhands kind of fit into a weird combination of weapons and armor, which we'll talk about. So let's start with armor. Armor is what's going to increase your physical and magic armor stats on your character, as well as provide other mechanical benefits from time to time. If we look here at the armor, I'm just going to pull up a leather cap. It says here it's giving us 2 physical and 1 magical armor, and it has no bonuses, no resistances. This is a number that will increase with our level. We can look under the attributes here to see exactly how this works. So it has an efficiency, which is kind of how good the armor is. If the armor has like a 1.1 efficiency, that means it's 10% more armor you're getting out of it than you would a generic common variant of it. And then we have the armor spread. This determines how the 2 types of armor are divided. There's 3 types. There's heavy armor, which is going to usually require you to have a strength score of a certain amount to use. There's light armor, which will require you to have a certain dexterity score. And then there's intellect, which will require you to have a certain intellect score. Sorry, there's robes, which require a certain intellect score. Heavy armor is going to have higher physical armor. Robes are going to have a higher magical armor. And light armor is going to be kind of more mixed between the 2. There's also different types of jewelry, which is your amulets, which are necklaces, rings, and there are belts. Rings are rings, belts are belts. If we look at the character sheet, we can see that we have an amulet slot, 2 ring slots, and a belt slot. And then we also have all these other slots. So there are 5 different types of armor you can wear, like 5 different slots of armor. You have helmets, chest, gloves, leggings, boots. It's right on the character sheet. As you equip them, they'll show up in these respective slots. You can select them with these slots as well, which we can quickly show. If we put this squire's helm here, this leather cap here, if I click here, it'll show me both, and I can switch between them freely. And we see that they give different values. Weapons are next on the list. Weapons have a little more to them. Let's look at a hammer. So they can be either one-handed or two-handed. They will scale with an attribute, and they will do a damage type, and they'll have a range. That's the gist of it. We have this hammer. So this is a melee weapon, right? Which means that the range is 0. It's going to use strength because it's a hammer. You need to be strong to swing a hammer. And it does physical damage because it's a hammer. It does physical damage. And then we have this efficiency stat, just like we did with the armor. This is going to be another flat scalar on it. And then we also have this bonus damage, which is a list of extra damage types that will do a percentage of the base damage. So we could have a hammer that like is on fire. If we have a hammer on fire, a magical fire hammer, it might do physical damage, but then it might also do 10% fire damage. And I'm going to take this as an opportunity to also go over these bonuses, which I didn't talk about with the armor, but it's the same on all pieces of gear. So there's the prerequisites, which is the scores you need to use it, but bonuses can give you bonuses to different abilities, either combat or civil abilities. They can give you bonuses to attributes like strength, dexterity, constitution, etc. And they can also give you resistances to different damage types or other miscellaneous bonuses, crit chance, crit damage, all these things that are on your character sheet. Sometimes they will give you an immunity to a status, like you can't be stunned, more on statuses later obviously. Sometimes weapons specifically will apply statuses, which they'll usually have a percentage chance, and that percentage is based off of the handedness of a weapon. So a two-handed weapon will have a higher percentage chance to apply a status than a one-handed weapon. And then there's effects, which if it applies effects to the actor who has it, they'll go there. You'll see that there's a damage here. It's going to be displayed in the same manner as skills, where it's just a range, which doesn't seem particularly helpful. That's because, much like skill damage, weapon damage scales off of character level, and it uses a formula based on character level. The tables for this are currently not in any published form, I suppose is one way to put it. They're all inside the GitHub repository. If you really need to see them, you can reach out via Discord and it can be made available. Moving on to offhands, these are kind of the simplest, and right as a level 1 character, the only main offhand is going to be a shield, which is going to give you armor. So offhands give you additional armor, and then they, much like weapons, much like armor, can give you status immunities, resistances, attribute bonuses, etc. They have an efficiency level just like armor does, and they have an armor spread just like armor does. Sometimes you may find a offhand that is like a casting focus that's not a weapon, like a crystal ball could be an offhand that when you're holding it, maybe it grants you a bonus to accuracy and maybe some other combat ability. And it might not give as much armor as a shield, but it'll attempt to make up for that in other ways. With offhands out of the way, we are mostly done with our items. Later on, when we go set up a character, we can kind of flesh out all this stuff will be filled in. The last main mechanical section is features. So features are kind of miscellaneous things. And in terms of functionality, they function like armor and weapons and all that, except they don't give armor or damage, and they just give you bonuses. But in addition to bonuses, they give you some other less numerical advantages. Let's break this down. Right there, there's this origin section. And your origin is made up of 3 primary things. There's your ancestry, which is your character's ties to their heritage and their blood kin. Some examples are human, elf, dwarf, orc. Ancestries will often grant skills, ability bonuses, or other features. So if we look here at human, we see they have a feature called amenable, where they gain a +1 to influence, and then they have the skill called inspiring, where they know the skill inspire. Then we go to backgrounds, and backgrounds are who your character was before they started adventuring. Was your character a hermit? Were they a noble? Were they a scholar? Were they something along those lines? And if we look through the backgrounds list, we'll see some examples of these. And backgrounds are made up of a similar, usually getting a +1 bonus to a civil ability. They don't have a huge mechanical impact, but they have this other thing where, let's pull up minstrel. So we write musician, you gain +1 to influence, right, for being able to play music and perform. But there's this other weird section that says you can always ... This is a list of things that your character is considered to be capable of, and these are things you can generally do, and there's the implied and have it work out. So if you're trying to do these things in a situation that makes sense, and at the end of the day it's up to game master discretion, these are things that you should never need to make a check to do unless you're under extraneous circumstances. If you're a minstrel and you want to play a song, you don't need to make a check to do that, but someone else might be able to play music, but they might not be as consistent. They might not be able to always do that. So we have backgrounds, and that's backgrounds. They're quite simple mechanically. And then we have, finally, professions. You may have noticed that thus far, the system has not mentioned classes or anything like that, and there aren't classes. But these are the closest thing the system has to what other TTRPGs might consider classes. This is where you might be a mage or a powerful necromancer, or bound to a pact, or a cleric, or a warrior, or an assassin, or something like that, right? This is what your character is, and these offer more of the same, honestly. They offer a little bit of everything. So let's look at assassin. So we have roguish, where they gain a +1 to Shroud Stalker, right? All of them are going to grant a +1 to a combat ability. Some of them might ask you to choose one, but they're always going to give you a bonus to a combat ability. And they're also pretty much always going to give you a always memorized skill. Sometimes these are skills that you wouldn't naturally be able to learn, which is kind of nice, right? Assassin gets the skill Blood Sacrament, which is a Deathbringer skill, which as an assassin, you might be putting all your points into Shroud Stalker and Warlord, because you don't want lifesteal because you're just an assassin, right? You're trying to kill people quickly. So you get this kind of assassin-like skill without needing to put extra combat points in places you don't want. There's another you can always section, which is a little shorter on occupations because occupations already have a lot going on. And these are kind of good ways to find direction in terms of combat mechanics. But with professions covered, that is all of these sections, but we can talk briefly about statuses, which if we open up this rules thing, we see this huge list of status effects. So what's going on here? Well, a lot's going on here. So statuses are kind of things that just happen. A lot of skills will cause them, like if you might cover someone in acid and then they get the acid status, or you might knock someone out and give them a sleep, or throw dust in their face, blinding them. Let's break down what makes up a status, because there's a few things that they all have in common or share with each other. Let's talk about burning. So it has a duration. All statuses have to have a duration. If their duration is instantaneous, it means they go away immediately. We have something they can be resisted by. So this is with armor. Right? If a character has any magic armor, they cannot be set on fire. It removes warm, wet, chilled, and oily. So if a character has any of these 4 statuses, right, if your character's coated in water and they're wet, and then you light them on fire, the water goes away. It blocks warm, which means that a character that's burning cannot get the status warm. And these are different bonuses or detriments or whatever that a skill will give a character. For example, a character on fire will be more resistant to water damage, but more vulnerable to fire damage. Skills can have damage that they'll do. So burning, at the start of every turn, a character will take fire damage. There's that. There's a lot of them. You can look through them in the Foundry if you want to see the full list, but it's not currently available anywhere else. I'm gonna really quickly go over the map, which and then we can get into character creation. So, right, this is just Foundry, right? Foundry, you can move tokens around the map. There's some extra things that you're seeing as we're moving around, right? Whenever I hover over this, we see this weird overlay. What's that about? We see this little pointer pointing at our character. What's that about? Okay, so an important rule that hasn't been covered before, but you might have noticed earlier, those with discerning eyes, that when we looked at a dagger, we saw this little thing. Can backstab. So what the heck does that mean? Well, you see here that we have this little pointer. That's where our character is facing. And you might be wondering, why does that matter? Well, I mean, you might have already put 2 and 2 together that, well, if a character can be backstabbed, then they have to be facing some direction because their back has to be stabbable. So we see here this little overlay that pops up, and there's a couple things you see. So there's this white circle, which is a character's range. So if they're here, right, they can attack this token here. Now we know, because this is a system that is played without a grid, notably. So it's nice to just be able to measure things. And then we see this weird blue cone and this little knife, which is the backstab icon in this. So if a character is standing somewhere within that blue circle or that blue cone, then they are able to backstab them. And they don't have to be literally within it, right? If they're here and for some reason can backstab from this range, then they're able to backstab it. It's mostly a guide. If you need to actually measure it at higher distances, you can use it as a 60-degree angle. So you can draw a 60-degree angle cone and then measure it if you would like. But this should cover most circumstances. As you're seeing, as I'm moving this character around, right, they're pointing towards where they're facing, because you can't walk somewhere without pointing towards it. But there's a few other situations where that might change. One way is that if we use a skill that places a template. So we see here, I guess we can go over using things after we have a character set up, but we have this, draw a template. It's going to do this, and you see that the character is now pointing towards where we placed this. There's some other ways, like if we make an attack against a creature, it'll also point the character away, and so on and so on. One last thing is that if we go into here, we go into controls, we can see these hotbars, but there's teleport controlled token, which sometimes a skill will tell you to teleport somewhere, and you don't want to walk through surfaces, so you can teleport there. Hooray! Okay, that's the map mostly taken care of. Something that GMs can do is they can actually create surfaces. So we see this, we have a fire surface, or we have a water surface. And some of these will do things on their own, like fire. If we try to move through the fire, we get lit on fire because it's fire. And these will interact with each other in different ways, like if we we put a giant square of water over the fire, the fire turns to steam, or fog is the technical term for that. And then if we, put ice next to the water, it's gonna freeze the water. And I'm doing that all on my GM account because player characters cannot create surfaces. Something that you noticed was there was that thing that popped up on the screen, like up the top here. There's a little token info thing. If you right click on a token, it'll lock that into place up there so that you can kind of monitor their stats. It has their armor, magic armor, health. And as we see here, it has any status effects and a timer on how long they're going. With that, I think that is pretty much all of the things we need for the map. And we can get into character creation. Alrighty. So getting into character creation. In order to create a character, we are going to use the rules in the Discord, because that is where all the rules are documented, of character creation. So I'm just going to go down this list from top to bottom, although most of these things don't actually require a specific order to be done. So we have the first component of a character, the origin, which we talked about in features. So we're gonna choose our ancestry, our background, and our profession. And this obviously is just up to personal preference, but let's take we'll take an orc. And we're gonna make sure you see this little thing here. Now that we have a item on our sheet, we can show this little equip/unequip button, which is important because you'll note when this is unequipped, we don't get our bonus to any civil abilities, and we also don't get our bonus to critical chance, which is what an orc gets. Now that we have this, you'll see that we have a +1 to religion. Cool. And you can see I'm going through these compendiums. That's where all these things are. We can just drag them to our character sheet from them. So we're going to go with a background now. Let's say that our orc friend here was a guard. He was a guard in the city before he started adventuring. So we're going to go grab the guard background and equip it. Finally, we need a profession. And our orc here, sometimes they have anger issues. Sometimes they get really mad when they're fighting. So we're going to give them barbarian, which I'm also picking because, as we'll see, it does synergize with the orc feature. But also just because it's fun, you know, big, burly, strong barbarian is fun. And we see here it grants a skill, Rage, which is not necessarily something that we can't get on our own, but it is a higher tier skill, which means, you know, it's nice that we get this early as a barbarian, and we don't have to worry about spending a memory slot on it. We've made our barbarian, except our barbarian can't do anything. Let's give them a talent, right? We get 1 talent at level 1, so we're going to go into the talents compendium and ignore that special tab because that's for special rules, and we want our orc to make sure that anyone who comes nearby is in danger. So we're going to give them Sentinel, which allows them to perform opportunity attacks, which is a special thing. If you look at opportunity attack, it'll say, but it allows us to attack characters that leave our melee range. So we have that. Now we need to do abilities. So we have here, we have 2 combat ability points and 1 civil ability point. I think it's nice to kind of spread out ability points early on. What we're going to do is we're going to put 1 point in Form Shifter and 1 point in Warlord, because that means that we now have access to Form Shifter and Warlord skills when we're learning skills. And I think Form Shifter skills can synergize with this build really well. And obviously, Warlord is kind of the main, you know, melee martial ability, so it's nice to have. And then we get another civil ability, and our character was a guard, and honestly, we want them to be a little more intimidating, you know, so we'll give them another point in influence. That's abilities. Now we move on to attributes, which we have here. I'm going to reset these all back to 10. And you'll note that we have an extra. We have 5 attribute points here because, as we see on Form Shifter, you gain 2 unspent attribute points for every point in Form Shifter. So, bam. Putting them all in strength. We want to hit things hard. We want to hit things hard often, so we're giving them as much strength as we need, or as we can. And with that strength there, we can go ahead and do our languages, which is not super impactful mechanically, but we get common by default, and then we get 1 other language. We're going to choose Snake Tongue because our character's been, you know, has dealt with criminals before, so we've learned their language kind of to better track them. Now we have time for skills. As you can see here on the character sheet, it says known 0 out of 4, which we get 4 skills at level 1, so that checks out. So we're going to go under skills. We're going to go look at combat skills, and we're going to go look in the only 2 we can learn, which is going to be Form Shifter and Warlord. I know what I want already. We're going to take Minotaur form and Battle Slam and Tentacle Strike, and then let's take, you know, just for the fun of it, we can get a little civil skill in here as well. We can only choose tier 1 skills because we're level 1. We would need to be level 4 for tier 2 skills. Looking at our civil skills or our civil abilities, we see that we have points in influence and religion, so we're only going to be able to choose an influence or religion ability. We'll take friends because it's fun. Everyone likes having friends. And then we can press this little button here. We see the requirements to learn and memorize here, right? We meet all these, so we can go ahead and memorize these skills by pressing this little memorize button, this little brain. And now that we have those set up, we can go ahead and move on to gear. So your character starts with a few pieces of gear, which, once again, this is all available in the playtest Discord. We get armor, and we're going to take heavy armor because we're a strength character. We get one piece of each slot. So one piece of each slot. Bam. And we can see, now you can see we equip them like this, where we just click these little icons, these little squares up here to equip the armor. And then we also get jewelry, right? We get one of each. It specifies you only get one ring, so we're not going to fill in both of our ring slots, but we have all these. And now, look, hey, we have physical armor and magic armor. Now that we have that, we can get weapons. So we get to choose one of 3 things for weapons. We can either get 2 one-handed weapons, we can get 1 two-handed weapon, or we can get a one-handed weapon and a shield. And we're not a coward, so we're going to take a two-handed weapon. Maybe like a big hammer. Yeah, a big hammer to smack people with. So we have this hammer. Bam, equipped. And now you'll notice that we also got this extra skill here now. We have this brutal strike, which we get by using a two-handed weapon. And using 2 one-handed weapons will also give a different thing. Not every combination of weapon and offhand gives you something, or not every combination of weapon and offhand gives you something. For example, if you're using 2 wands, I don't believe you get the same flurry move and that you would get for having 2 daggers, and scepters specifically don't get this all-in thing, this brutal strike. They get the ability to sling magic, because if we open this up, we see that scepters are melee weapons, but they give you the ability to use a special ranged attack, a little magical ranged attack. That's our gear. That was pretty simple, I think, pretty straightforward in terms of overall process. Now we're gonna really quickly just do a couple things just to show you how to use these things that we have, right? I mentioned we can click around here. We can also manually equip and unequip items by pressing this little button here. We see under this menu that these give armor. We can see the armor they're giving us here. We can see that. You may have noticed by now, but whenever we hover things in our inventory, something pops up in the top right, a little info about them. This is especially useful with skills. We can see the damage, we can see all these other things. If we right click them, we can pull up this menu to edit them or view all this info in a maybe easier to see manner. And then also if you click this little notepad icon, it also does it. This little trash can icon tells us to delete things. We don't want to delete things right now, so we're not. Whenever we go to use a skill, it'll ask us if we want to use the resources to use the skill. And it's almost always going to be yes. We're out of combat right now, so you'll see that we don't actually use the action points, because action points don't matter when you're not in combat. But it'll put this message in chat. It'll have all these buttons to do. We can, let's say we want to attack someone. In order to attack someone, we have to target them, and then we hit roll attack, and it's going to roll an attack. It says demonstration attacking Morgan. We roll a d100. This green means that it hits, red means that it misses, and blue means that it's a critical hit. And because we hit it, we're going to roll our damage. There's this button, you either hit normal or critical. We're going to hit normal, and we're going to roll our dice. See, look, there are dice. It's not just random numbers, but the dice come from a table. So we're doing 2d6 plus this 1.64, which is coming from our strength, among other things, among the fact that this weapon, see, it does 125% physical damage. Oh, sorry, I don't think this is a weapon skill, actually. I don't know why I said it's using our weapon. This is using, yeah, this is a magic skill. This does not use our weapon. So that, we'll make a weapon attack soon. But yeah, see, we're pointing towards them. We rolled some dice. We can't apply damage because we're not the GM, but the GM can go ahead and apply the damage, pressing that button on their end. It looks like they had some retributive, so they reflected a little bit of damage back at us. Some skills like Battle Slam here is going to have us draw a template. We have this little cone, so we're going to do that, and we're going to once again attack. And this time when we roll damage, it's going to use a d12. And it's a completely different formula. And this is using our weapon damage. We have something like this, which we can show off this skill. This skill doesn't do anything. It doesn't have cost any action points. We see the action points cost here. But if we apply the status, now we get this extra skill that we can use, which is fun. And yeah, that's kind of that skill's all set up for our character. That's kind of everything set up for our character, actually. As we level up, we are going to literally just change this number. The system does not use any form of experience. It's purely milestone based, where the GM says you level up and you level up. If you want to try and use some sort of XP system, you can, but there's not any in place right now. When we level up our character, it's not going to do anything automated except for update these values, right? It tells us we have an unspent skill point. It tells us we have more skills to memorize. It says we have unspent attribute points. You know, our HP and armor and all that went up, but other than that, nothing changed. If we are in combat and we need to manually update these action point values, we can do so by just clicking them. Same thing with our things. And one other thing that will help out a lot, at least in my opinion, it helps out a lot, is there's this button here that says populate hotbar. And if we hit it, it's going to ask if we want to, because if we did have things on this hotbar down here, it would delete them. But we do this. Now we have this. We have all these skills. We have all these icons. And we could have done this on our own by just moving these here, but we didn't do that because this is easier. And we can move these around if we want. If we click this button, it opens and closes it. This specifically opening and closing is from a module called like Monk's Enhanced Hotbar or something like that. I forget the name off the top of my head. Then if we use these, if we click this, it's gonna show a slight issue. This is an issue with world configuration, not with the system, where it's not letting us use a macro that's already been created by another user. If we can find a macro that hasn't been made, like maybe this one. Yeah, if we click them, it'll do this. You'll also see that if we hover these, it does the same thing it does in the inventory to show us the skill we're using. It has the name down there, like above them when we hover them. And in combat, that means that we don't have our character sheet open, but we have down here, we have our resources, we have our skills here, and we can kind of just focus on that. Just as a reminder, the hotkey, there's a lot of hotkeys to target things. One of them, though, is T, and if you need to target multiple T, you can do Shift T. And if we do this, we can roll multiple attacks. But with that, I think that concludes this sort of rundown. I know it was a lot. If you need to go back through things, you can go back and rewind through this video. If you need to ask questions, or want to ask questions, there are resources that may answer them in the Discord, but if they aren't answered by the Discord, you can ask them in the Discord, and I or someone else will happily answer. Thanks for watching.